Good morning and welcome to the Fort Rodman Complex here in New Bedford, Massachusetts. My name is Doug Bingham. I'm a Raynham resident working with the Raynham channel now, and it's my hope that we'll be able to bring you a number of interesting programs about local history, sources of fascination to myself and to many other people. We hope to show you lighthouses, the islands of the local area, the Cranberry bogs, some Cape Cod history, and lots more. This morning we're at Fort Tabor, Fort Rodman, New Bedford. We're going to be touring the Military Museum right behind me. We have a docent or a volunteer here to escort us around the property to show us some of the more interesting sites and some of the more important sites. And we hope that you'll enjoy the journey with us. So without further ado, let's go inside. This building is one of the few remaining buildings from Fort Rodman, which began construction just before the First World War and shut down shortly after World War II. There were many buildings on this complex. Again, this is the only remaining one, and with the cooperation and assistance of the City of New Bedford, they have one of the prized military museums in the USA. All right, we're inside the Fort Tabor Military Museum here at New Bedford, Mass. And this is just an absolutely fascinating place that will take you from the American Revolution right through the current conflicts in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and much of the Middle East. We'll be seeing native costumes from those areas, artifacts of different types, from weapons to machine guns to uniforms to medals. You name it, they have it here. Anything having to do with American military history. We're in the old museum part of the building. This building has been expanded since it first began a number of years ago. And I'm here with Steve Rogers, who is one of the docents and more advanced leaders of the group here at Fort Tabor's Military Museum. We're in a relatively untouched area since the layout is still being planned, but we're starting here with the American Revolution era. We have an item such as a piece of the upper mast of one of the masts from the USS Constitution, or old Ironsides, some firearms, muzzle loaders mostly, and various types of ammunition, cannonballs, in various states of disrepair, probably used at one time. Steve can comment more on that. So what do we have here?
Well, this building was actually the old original PX building.
Okay.
For the Fort Rodman.
All right, we're here in the certain corner of the building that houses a collection of Medal of Honor winners here in the New Bedford area, along with photographs of Abraham Lincoln and many other notable characters of the War of 1812 and the Civil War. There are cases full of arms and ammunition, clothing, different types of caps called kepi.
To tell you, these were the arms of the day: the bayonet, the sabers, cannonballs, the mini balls, and the ammunition over here.
Is anybody here familiar with the manufacturers of some of these swords and cutlasses?
No one that I know of.
Nobody?
Now, we have a Civil War group that meets here, and they do things at the fort here and at Fort Phoenix and Fairhaven.
And that would be the Civil War Roundtable.
Right, right. Those would be the people that would be more aware of this type of thing. I'm a Korean War era guy, so I grew up during World War II and served during Korea.
I know that there are different types of ammunition for cannons and small guns, including solid shot is a bolt shot. There's grape shot, or case shot actually. These are small pellets inside of a larger pellet that once it explodes from the heat and the pressure of the gases in the cannon, it makes a very wide field that can penetrate just about anything in its path. And various weapons along with this, and tools to clean rifles and cannons of various sizes. There are a number of people up here: William Carney, William Downey, David Gifford, Colonel David W. Wardrop, George Cummings, and George Wixon, all different medal winners from the Civil War. A very fascinating collection indeed. And there's actually a Harper's Weekly here, an original copy of a front page showing a battle ongoing somewhere during that Civil War era. Absolutely fascinating.
It is. It's fascinating to be down here as a volunteer.
Over in this case, we have different types of bayonets. There are sabers and cutlasses, quite different in that a saber was actually a long blade, of course, with a handle that had sharp edges on both sides, and a cutlass which actually only had one sharp edge. And this one has seen a lot of use, obviously. It was a Zouave. These were the German Civil War soldiers who fought on the American side against the Confederacy, who carried this particular type of saber. A lot of them are rusty, having been in many years in the ground. And on this side, there is a post-World War I collection of photographs taken locally here at Fort Rodman and Fort Tabor. And Steve can elaborate more on the actual name of the property that we're on. He told me at one point there really was never a Fort Tabor. Is that correct?
The Fort Tabor was a small fort built just south of the refreshment stand, and the footprint is still there. And they named it Fort Tabor because it was named after the mayor of the city at the time. When the federal government took over this land, it became Fort Rodman. And then it was federal property, and then they built the fort up. They built all the embankments, the stations for the cannon and so forth. And then when I was a boy, there were all barracks along the street coming in here, the old wooden barracks, and then there were officers' quarters on the other side of that.
Now, when exactly or approximately did this fortress actually begin in its earliest stages?
It was Robert E. Lee designed this fort, and it was designed for this when the British were after they attacked Dartmouth and New Bedford. Now, if you go through New Bedford, you'll still see some of the chimneys painted with a white stripe around them.
Yes.
That's because those were Tories who lived in those houses. So
and this is prior to the Civil War.
Right. So
War of 1812, maybe?
Yep. And the British didn't burn them when they burned the village of Dartmouth and houses in New Bedford and Acushnet, which is now Acushnet. It was formerly New Bedford also.
So there really was a series of engagements around here between the British and the Americans.
Yeah, they were. Well, because a lot of the ships sailed as privateers out of New Bedford. They were legal pirates.
Yeah. I'm well acquainted with that particular era of history. Now, I knew that the British did attack up around the Cape Cod and Mass Bay coastlines as well, up through Weymouth and Scituate and Hingham.
They burnt Dartmouth, Patenarum Village, and they came into New Bedford and burnt some of the houses here. Like I said, the white stripe meant they were Tories.
Wow.
Those didn't get burnt.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We're in the corner right now. We're looking at some artifacts and photographs and all sorts of materials pertaining to the Spanish-American War period, which was about 1898. And I was just having a little chat off camera about some of the ships that are portrayed here. The USS Maine, which blew up in Havana Harbor, Cuba, during the Spanish-American War, and it was very controversial shipwreck. It was often thought that the ship was torpedoed or mined by the Spanish when they were occupying Cuba, but that turned out not to be the case. The Maine actually sunk because of a coal bin explosion. The evidence that was brought up in recent years has testified to that fact. And she has since been removed from Havana Harbor many years ago and was taken offshore and was sunk. And she is still a national treasure that is dived on by some very experienced divers only who are able to work at very extreme depths. And the USS Olympia, which is still afloat at Penn's Landing, which is a maritime museum in Camden, New Jersey, on the border of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And she can be boarded and observed by many people at almost any time of the year. She's a national treasure as well, but the ship you see here isn't the ship that's there right now. The ship there right now is in very fragile condition. Again, there are firearms here, pistols, single-shot pistols and revolvers. There are entrenching tools or spades, which are a fold-up device that can be attached to your waist belt or your backpack during wartime. And our cameraman, Alan Russell, is well acquainted with those. Breech loaders, belts of different types. There's an authentic wool blanket from the Spanish-American War. Stripes that were sewn onto a soldier's sleeves. Totally different color and different pattern, obviously an Irish regiment. And a model of the USS Massachusetts. This particular ship here currently rests on the bottom in very shallow water just outside the harbor at Pensacola, Florida. And there's a wonderful view here of the Camp Rodman, or the Fort Rodman property here in New Bedford, showing it in one of its heydays with various tents where the enlisted men would live, but all the officers had comfortable quarters. Go figure. And close-up photographs of the property as it once was, including the buildings where mines were stored. During World War I and World War II, New Bedford had minefields offshore, which I just learned today. I find that interesting. But given the fact that New Bedford is a very heavily and widely exposed area, it wouldn't be surprising to find out that we were susceptible to enemy attack here during World Wars I and II. There were submarines on patrol offshore. We know that to be a fact. But this is a very interesting collection. There's a photograph of the casemate, a photograph of Commodore George Dewey, and the title of Commodore is only given during wartime. That is a wartime rank for an officer. And other photographs of soldiers at various activities here in and around the Fort Tabor, Fort Rodman property. There's a wall over here, a pre-World War II. Can you tell us something about this, Steve?
Okay, this is the way Fort Rodman was prior to the beginning of World War II. There was a station here. We have an aerial view of the fort as it was at the time. And again, they only fired the cannon as practice. You can see the bringing up an artillery shell. The uniforms they wore, these were blue in their day. We have a hat like this. And these are the old uniforms, showing them in the old wool overcoats. And all of these pictures are prior to World War II starting.
Now, in one of my questions to you earlier about the coastal artillery, I noticed that the regiment that was here was part of the 23rd Coastal Artillery Regiment at Fort Rodman.
Yep.
They had an 8-inch disappearing gun, which I was explaining to Alan earlier, and there's a good view of the back end of one here. These are operated by hydraulics.
Yep.
They could be lowered so they could be reloaded or loaded initially and then raised up to their firing position. And I understand the concussion from these cannons was very, very great. Sometimes it would shatter glass for miles around.
We fired them one time and they shattered all the glass in the barber shop that was on the base. The barber came in the next day and found glass all over the place.
Wow.
I think we have...
We got a surprise here. My good friend Don Perkins. We have a replica of Fort Tabor, and that is out here at the entrance. We'll be seeing that eventually on the way out. And this is the man who designed this amazing tabletop replica, my good friend Don Perkins from Cape Cod. Don is quite renowned for his model making abilities, and his models are in many lighthouse museums, primarily, all over the East Coast and the northeastern U.S. We have quite an assemblage of artifacts in this corner pertaining to World War I, from woolen uniforms up on top, with the Scottish Brigade represented. There's a Canadian battery company, the 43rd Canadian Battery,
with the socks.
with leggings, garters, dog tags, binoculars, Cameron Highlands cap, and a photograph of this particular gentleman wearing his uniform, including a kilt. Purple Heart, sheet music, the military waltz. There's a German gas mask. There's a Coast Artillery drill regulation book. leggings, canteens, a rucksack, all types of things, photographs, photo albums, newspaper stories from the Boston Sunday Globe magazine. And of course, as Steve pointed out, this shell art from 40mm shells and a 75mm shell with a doughboy helmet with a finial attached to right on top, making a lamp. Very clever indeed. And of course, a doughboy outfit with the khaki uniform.
Summer uniform.
Yeah, it's a summer uniform with a Mounties cap, similar to what you see with the National Park Service Rangers when they wear this. There are portraits and more doughboy helmets, different types of watches and watch fobs, and of course the World War I arms and bayonets up here on the wall.
And we have an assortment of helmets, camouflage, and British and American.
This is a fabulous collection. And we have lots more to see as we make our way around this building.
We haven't even got the World War
We
I.
barely scratched the surface. Now we're going to see the World War II exhibits next. Let's move on. Now over here we have a trench kit with a rather lethal looking weapon here.
Brass knuckles.
Brass knuckles with a dagger.
That was for trench warfare.
Wow. US 1918, look at that.
Yeah.
With the canteen mess kit. The LSMs, there were a whole series of ships that began with L. There were LSTs, LSIs, LSMs.
Yep.
Each one had a different purpose, but the LST was the one that many soldiers dreaded the most.
Well, I don't know about that.
Because of their flat bottoms crossing the Atlantic and the Pacific?
Is that better? I don't know.
No, these were terrible. These were the ships every guy feared because of their flat bottoms. They would roll. They were notorious for rolling. And these ships carried thousands of men across the ocean, both the Army and the Marines, Coast Guard. In fact, during wartime, most of these ships were manned and staffed by Coast Guard members,
Right.
carrying other military forces with them. And more often than not, the men aboard these ships, even on a calm day, were seasick virtually most of the day. So rather than eating meals, they lived off of sausage sandwiches and fruits and vegetables, things that wouldn't upset their stomachs too much. They were just notorious, but ships of this type here would have carried the tanks, the trucks.
Yep.
You're noticing the deep bay here in the center. These are transports for machinery and mobile units. And of course, they had gun batteries surrounding the ship, 40 and 50 millimeter cannons all the way around. They may have, in this scale here, they may look like machine guns, but they're actually foot-operated cannons. I served on a ship in the Navy that had a similar gun, 40 millimeter, with a shell about 40 millimeters long. And they had an effective range of about 6 miles. Not very accurate, but if you pumped enough of those in any given direction, you're sure to hit your target. And of course, they had the K-Park life rafts. These would stay afloat for a short period of time. If a ship went down and you had to get to the life rafts, this is what you had. You'd be constantly soaking wet because of the web bottom. And if the web bottom gave way, you became shark food, especially in the South Pacific, as with the case of the USS Indianapolis. When that ship was sunk by a Japanese submarine, they didn't have time to get to the life rafts. And of over 900 crewmen, less than 300 survived, if that. But we have a variety of photographs here. Can you tell me about something about these people?
Okay, these are all women who served in the military at different times, World War II, Korea, and whatever.
And here we have an enlisted female uniform. This would be a day type wear for the office or
That's a whack.
some non-official duty. And of course the official uniform for an officer.
Yep.
This woman would have been a lieutenant commander, noticing the 2 wide stripes and a half stripe in the center.
And then we have a Marine
Yeah,
enlisted.
that's the classic female Marine uniform.
We have
Yep.
an Army lieutenant.
Yeah. And this was another wave for the U.S. Navy. She was a first-class petty officer, yeoman, or clerk.
Navy
and she had approximately 16 years of service under her belt. One stripe. They call these hash marks. One for every 4 years.
Right.
Yep.
I'm surprised. I didn't realize they used the overseas caps.
Yeah. Not commonly seen, but
No.
and they have changed to a slight degree. The Navy changed all of their uniforms during the 70s and 80s, and nobody liked them. Absolutely nobody.
We had khakis and
Yeah.
chinos. That was
Yep.
it.
And of course, we have other types of ships here. Transport ships that carry tanks. Again, this is another flat bottom here, mostly for machinery and mobile weaponry.
And your torpedo boat.
Yep, torpedo boats were very fast.
Very.
And the PT boat, this is the classic. If you went down to the Fall River Battleship Cove,
They have one.
they have a separate building in there with various degrees of restoration going on with PT boats. Some of them, they just have the bow area. Some have only maybe the bridge, if you will, the control center. But there is one intact PT boat down there in Fall River, which you can walk over. They've
Right.
specially designed a boardwalk,
Right.
so you can't touch the vessel
I've
itself.
seen an article about it. I've never
Yeah,
seen it.
very fast, very swift, high speed, built of plywood. And this is exactly the type of PT boat that John F. Kennedy would have been on board during World War II and during his famous expedition when he and his men ended up in the water and was stranded on an island. And we have the Lionfish submarine. We have a hospital ship, Navy supply, probably an ocean liner. Several ocean liners were converted to carry troops, like the Queen Elizabeth and the Normandy, the United States, and many others, where they were taken over by the U.S. Navy.
That's a World War I machine gun. It belongs in the World War I section. It's a water-cooled.
A water-cooled machine gun. This is the type that they had to literally sit on the ground, low profile. And what is the data on this? Automatic only, recoil operated, water cooled. It's rated as a 7.62 millimeter heavy ball
It's a Russian.
with a 185 gram bullet, 50 gram charge. Wow. The muzzle velocity 2,830 feet per second. That's over half a mile a second.
What a
And
weapon,
they-
but boy, I'd hate to lug it
It
around.
took a capacity of a 250 round fabric belt. This is 52.8 pounds unloaded, just the gun itself. The total weight of this gun with its carriage is 99.71 pounds with the shield and water. This is 43.6 inches long. The barrel itself is 28.4, 4 grooves with a right-hand twist. And the capacity of firing here, 520 to 580 rounds a minute. And the effective range, 1,100 yards. And the Soviet Army utilized this particular weapon during the Finnish-Soviet Winter War of 1939-1940. And the Finnish Army captured the weapon during that conflict. Amazing.
I still wonder how it got here.
Finnish Army, my ancestors. Here we have some more German and Japanese artifacts. We have a regimental flag, I believe.
We have German and Japanese.
Oh, yes. Now, the Americans quite frequently in the Pacific captured Japanese flags that basically were called blood chits.
Oh, really?
Yes. I don't really know what the name meant, but there was a name given to them. I'd like to figure that part out a little bit more.
Probably.
Here we have an Army occupation patch for Austria. E for efficiency. The 22nd Coast Artillery.
Yeah. That we have a combat infantry badge, the blue.
Okay.
Kentucky long rifle.
What is the one with the panther?
The what?
The panther, the Black Panther here. Was that a German thing?
I don't think so. It wouldn't be with an American
No,
CIV.
no.
Now, the
That
other-
might have been a division emblem of some sort.
I would guess a regimental
Yeah.
thing or something again.
We have a Japanese battle flag from World War II, a Japanese news magazine. Here's a World War II flag.
Yeah, there's the ruptured duck again.
Yep. And we had a Japanese flag here with a lot of Japanese inscriptions. Might be prayers or names of family members. Unless we had an interpreter, we would never know.
It's out of my realm.
Yeah. Wow.
And again, these are all men who served from Greater New Bedford, World War II.
Oh, this is something I've always been curious about. In the aftermath of World War II, Sugamo prison in Japan, how some of the most infamous Japanese war criminals, including Premier Hideki Tojo, I'd heard of Tojo many times,
Yep.
and I tour guide, Dukino, better known as Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose, pardon my tongue here, was a woman who broadcast all types of messages to the Allied forces during World War II, trying to demoralize them, telling them how their wives had left them and their sweethearts had abandoned them. She did everything possible while they played beautiful music, but she would sound these little blurbs in between musical sequences over the radio. It says, in all, over 2,000 war criminals and protected witnesses were held at Sugamo, and almost 60 prisoners were executed and others were sentenced to prison terms.
Not enough.
No.
This is the fellow I was telling you about. Four brothers served in World War II, father served in World War I, and he served during the Korean War.
Yep.
Foster family.
Wonderful collection.
Excuse me?
Wonderful collection.
Yeah.
Wow. Absolutely wonderful.
And we have a pair of World War II boots.
Oh my word, look at the well worn. The U.S. Army knife, flare gun and canisters.
It's a flare gun.
National Guard commemorative medallion. Overseas caps, cameras, wonderful old Kodak type. Contesto Nettus or Nettle.
110.
Yeah. Contessa Nettle is the name of the camera, but it's reminiscent of the old Bellows type Kodak with the plate glass negatives.
Yep.
That's amazing.
We have a safe conduct pass for German soldiers.
Okay, the German soldier who carried the safe conduct is using it as a sign of his genuine wish to give himself up. He is to be disarmed, to be well looked after, to receive food and medical attention as required, and to be removed from the danger zone as soon as possible. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander. Wow. That's great. Here we have a British sailor's cap, the USS Dartmouth, in Her Majesty's Submarine Force.
And a Panzerfaust, tank killer.
Oh,
German tank killer.
yeah. It's a
Panzerfaust.
German tank killer. This was, I believe, fired?
Panzerfaust.
Okay, fired from a tank.
Yeah, it's a
Oh
tank.
my word.
Anti-tank gun.
Wow.
That's the one you see with the Germans, with their youth and old men at the end of the war.
We hear about RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades. This is a large-scale model of one of those. To disarm a tank or to disable a tank.
That was their bazooka. We came out with a bazooka.
Yeah. And this was fired from under the arm.
Yeah.
Oh my word.
You held it more like a shotgun. You'd fire it
Held like this, under the arm and fired like a
rather
shotgun.
than shoulder fire.
And this part here
that took
would
off.
release itself from the tube and you'd fire that at a tank, maybe at its tracks underneath it to get to the belly of the tank. Either way, trying to disable that tank as best you can. And here we have a mortar on top.
Yep.
Still in use, I believe. This, of course, is one of the most terrible moments in human memory.
I've been to Dachau and I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I didn't even take any pictures at Dachau because I felt it was too sacred a spot.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of the people, you can't believe, the smell was still there in 1953
Yeah.
of burnt flesh. You
Yeah.
can't forget burnt flesh.
Yeah. This is another thing that just boggles the imagination, how we knew this was going on in the late 1930s. We knew it. The U.S. government was aware of it, but it wasn't our concern.
The Swiss were letting the trains go through Switzerland with the people in it. The Swiss.
It's a troubling time. It's still troubling to this day.
Very troubling. Well, the Swiss made a lot of money off the war, let me tell you.
I think about it and I just, words can't express sometimes just what this meant to so many people and how many.
Well, this gentleman was a tailor in New Bedford, Landau. He wrote the book, and he still had his tattoo on his wrist.
Yeah.
And there was another fellow that ran a little variety store, Sam, lived next door to my daughter. He just moved to New Jersey to be with his son because he's in his 90s now.
I lived in South Carolina for 10 years, and in the line of business that I was in, I became quite good friends with a Jewish fellow who ran a deli and bakery in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. And he had the tattoo with the numbers. And one day, he noticed me looking at it. He started talking. And when I left, I was in tears. I still get choked up thinking about it.
I mean, when you see the pictures of them liberating, a friend of mine, Eli Heinberg, was with the troops that liberated one of the camps, and he said, "You can't." He says, "Nothing I could describe ever in my life that you would even understand."
Yeah. This may not be one of the greatest displays in my mind.
It's just a small display.
But the fact that it's here.
Well, we felt it was
This
important.
speaks volumes.
We felt it was important.
Absolutely. This speaks volumes to anybody who takes a moment to think about it, to remember it, to learn of it. That you can't say enough about this, but at the same time, sometimes words don't.
Words can't express the way you feel.
They don't. The words are inadequate.
If you don't feel it inside, I don't think you're human, but that's my feeling. But
I'm not trying to grandstand anything in front of a camera with Alan here and yourself, but having known a few people who ran for 5 years or 6 years, just one step ahead of the Germans.
Yeah.
Just constantly on the run.
I mean, I was a shutterbug when I was in Europe, but I couldn't take pictures there. I felt it was just too much. It wasn't right to take pictures.
And the picture wouldn't do justice.
Well, it just didn't feel right.
No.
Not something I wanted a memory of, really. Even though I didn't survive it or anything, it just didn't seem right. So I didn't take pictures.
That's quite understandable. And it seems like the more technical we become as the years go by, the more ignorant many of us are about this. And there are people today who deny this. From all walks of life. Even some Americans. There are leaders in various communities who will say this didn't happen.
They still deny the moonwalk too. The same people. But what can I say?
That's troubling. That is really troubling.
Yeah, so we have a small display here.
Well, I thank you for that, for sharing this. This is sort of the creme de la creme of the museum. I mean, it's hard to say that because there's so much here that speaks to so many issues, both political, military, civil issues, which is why we have a military service. In fact, 5 of them, the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, and Air Force. But in its earliest life, this was a Civil War era granite fortress Fort Tabor or Fort Rodman goes well before that, into the War of 1812 and the American Revolution. There has always been a military presence on this property in one form or another, right through World War II, when the property was finally abandoned and handed over to the city of New Bedford. This particular model was made by my good friend Don Perkins, who comes from Pocasset on Cape Cod. Come on over, Don. What inspired you to do this?
Something to do, number one, and just because I'm involved in lighthouses. This happened to have a lighthouse, but the fort came with it, and I figured that'd be the perfect thing for the area, and it's a challenge to do it, but it turned out beautifully. The people down here received it beautifully. I'm just happy I was able to do it.
How long did this take you?
About a year.
Wow. I know you've done a lot of different models over the years, and I've helped you with a couple of locations where some of your other models are located,
Right.
in coordinating those donations, but this particular one here, I wasn't even aware of until I walked in here one day and I saw your name attached to it.
Well, the thing is, it's just unique. Is at the time they had the Civil War enactment here, and I had it done during that time, and it worked out beautifully. And this happened to be the first model in this particular museum, which was quite the thing. So it's moved around since, like everything else.
Yeah, yeah.
But they've done a great job setting this up on the display here. They're kind great. So.
Yeah, the detail inside is just, it's a work of art. When I look at this, I've had the good fortune of being inside the fort. I think you have also.
Yeah, I had to, in order to do this model, I had to have up close video of it because it was so detailed. Well, you know, oddly enough, I was just taking pictures of it, and I had forgotten really what I had really done to this thing. Of all the doors and the landings on the backside, and I said, "Gee, that's pretty good."
Yeah. Now, I was really astounded that even after all these years, that some of the ironwork is still intact inside that fort.
Yeah.
And you can still see some of the palisades with the arches and where the living quarters were, and how the fort has evolved over time. Besides being just a Civil War fortification, there were additions during World War I and World War II, where there were observation posts over here on top of the fort to coordinate the guns that were being fired at sea level. You can't always see from sea level what you can see from the top of a tall structure. So you have the observation posts in the upper elevations, and working by radio telephone with the gun batteries down below, you can coordinate these guns so they can cover all of Buzzards Bay. And of course, we saw in another detailed plan that there were different types of guns which could fire 3 miles or 7 miles or 10 miles, but the largest and most accurate guns in here could fire effectively at a range of 16 miles. So you could effectively fire a shell from here at Fort Tabor all the way to Gayhead and Martha's Vineyard. And that's quite a ways down the bay.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And of course, the fort itself, which we'll see outside in a few minutes, was never really completed. We only have 2 levels here, the ground level and the ramparts here, with the various bastions, including the lighthouse that we see here, Clark's Point Lighthouse. The lighthouse originally was not here. It was on another site on the property of Fort Rodman, well before Fort Rodman became a reality. But because of the construction of the fort, that old lighthouse became ineffective. So that was dismantled, taken down, and a new structure was put on top of the northeast bastion, where that was the one that was closest to the entrance to New Bedford Harbor. We'll get a look at that as well once we get outside. The close of the Civil War came, and as a result of that, the third level was never completed. The granite for this fort was harvested from quarries that were local to this area, Dartmouth, New Bedford. Wherever they could find granite, it was quarried out. I don't know where the actual quarries were, but they were here in southeast Mass. That's a possibility. Some of it may be Quincy granite from my hometown. That was noted for its hardness and for the ability to be such a workable stone. It was easily cut and shaped and polished. But of course, this is a rough exterior. And here we can even see the ports where the cannons were located in different directions. It's too bad we can't get inside, but another time, maybe. But I thank you for doing this and for coming out. I know it's a brief time that you were here with us, but I'm grateful to see you.
Yeah. Well, the main thing is, like I've always said to everybody, people love models. It brings them right up close. They may never, this one here happens to be right out back here, or out front. But for lighthouses, most people will never see that particular lighthouse. They see it modeled up front, and in the process of getting people aware of lighthouses, to save the lighthouses, this is what the whole thing's all about. This is unique in its own, being a fort that it is, and it just, everything worked out perfect for this particular setup. And then with them setting up this museum, everything fell in place perfectly. You know, so it's been great.
Yeah, it's a work of art, and I hope that they keep us here for many, many years to come. You notice the keystones on top of the arches and how there are stones facing it, you know, to form a molding or a trim around it. And the angled walls in here, and the brickwork. Quite frequently in some of these old buildings, the bricks were cut to a certain dimension and thickness and curvature to effectively fit the arches. I mean, the various lines and angles in here, this is a beautiful, beautiful example of a third system of defense. The first system would have been earthen bunkers. I can show you an example of that up in Salem sometime. The second system were brick and wood fortresses. The third system were these granite defenses like this, with walls that are up to 8 to 12 feet thick in some places, virtually impenetrable. A ship firing on it from offshore would have no effect whatsoever. Absolutely no effect. Their cannonballs would bounce off a structure like this, made of granite. In the south, say Charleston, South Carolina, during the early part of the Civil War and the War of 1812, they built fortresses out of palmetto trees. Palmetto trees have a very thick bark on the outer side and a spongy inner core, rather than a wood that we would normally see in a tree. And there were cannonballs that would bounce off of those logs, but they were vulnerable to erosion, wind, weather, and they would eventually deteriorate. I mean, this is a beautifully designed structure. So when we think of the Army Corps of Engineers who engineered and built this, we think of people like Robert E. Lee, Admiral William Shubrick, General Joseph Totten. They were three of the principal designers and engineers behind the construction of fortresses like this. And it's my hope that sometime soon we'll get down to Newport and see Fort Adams, which is even more impressive than this. But this is impressive for the amount of ironwork that's still here in its unspoiled nature. And this is the Clark's Point Lighthouse, which preceded the Butler Flats Lighthouse, which is less than a mile offshore here at the entrance to New Bedford Harbor. Once this light was deemed unusable in the 1870s era, Butler Flats Lighthouse was constructed. It put this one into a darkened position, if you will. But this was largely restored by the city of New Bedford between 2003 and 2005 at virtually no cost to the taxpayers. But once again, vandals have had their way. They find their ways to sneak in here and take delight in destroying something so historic. Yeah, these were living quarters, bakeries,
Yeah.
kitchens.
Yeah, they had the electric.
Yep. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Of course, some of these areas over there were powder magazines.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, somewhere very close to the brickwork and
Yeah.
the stonework. This is amazing. Yeah, it wouldn't be too healthy to go in some of these chambers. Wow. I've never been in some of the spaces. The last time I was in the fort, I was only allowed on the grounds. With somebody monitoring every step we took here. Anybody's got to vandalize. Tell us about this, Paul.
Okay, this is a footprint of what the original Fort Tabor once stood. It was named after the then mayor of New Bedford, Mayor Tabor. It housed, it was an earthworks fort that housed about 4 cannon, and they found it to be inadequate. It couldn't protect the harbor from the privateers that were coming in, so they decided to build a bigger fort, and that's when they designed and built the fort in back of it right now. It was called the Fort at Clark's Point. The Fort at Clark's Point was completed around 1863, and then they dismantled the small earthworks fort, and they took the cannons from the fort and put them into the bigger fort.
Wow.
And the little brick structure on here is the actual size and shape of the fort. Of Fort Tabor. But Fort Tabor ceased to exist after they tore down the original fort. And like I said, they still call the area Fort Tabor, but actually it's Fort Rodman. We call it Fort Rodman.
How long has this restored footprint been here?
It's been here. Well, I've been here. I say 5 or 6 years. I was here before then, so it's been here quite a while.
Okay. But I urge you folks to come down here to New Bedford. See the Lightship Memorial. Come down here to Fort Tabor. Visit the Military Museum. See the lighthouses. This is a place that many people know about who live here locally. But outside of New Bedford, there aren't many people who know of the treasures that are down here. And it's our hope that in future programs we'll be able to show you some of those treasures in other towns, other locations, islands, lighthouses, historic ships. Who knows where our cameras are going to take us? But get out there. See Massachusetts, see New England. There's a lot to find for yourself. Thank you. We're just a few yards, if you will, east of Fort Tabor or Fort Rodman Reservation here at the southern tip of New Bedford. Looking out here at the entrance to New Bedford Harbor. Directly ahead of us is the Butler Flats Lighthouse. This is an 1870s era lighthouse. There are several of this type around the Northeast. Most of them you'll find in New York waters from Orient Point on the eastern point of Long Island and along the Long Island Sound area into New York Harbor. We don't have many cast iron lights like this in Massachusetts. The only one that comes to mind would be the old bug light, or as we call it in Plymouth Harbor at the edge of Duxbury Bay, but it's not at all like this one. This is a spark plug style, or a coffee pot style, if you can imagine putting a handle on this, any face of this tower. It would look like an old-fashioned coffee pot that your grandparents might have used, or that maybe you used when you went camping somewhere. Generally, you had one or maybe two people stationed at a tower like this. I know that a late friend of mine, his name was Harold Flegg, who came from Medfield, Massachusetts, but eventually retired to Cape Cod, was on this lighthouse for a short time after the Vineyard Lightship was lost in 1944 during that fatal hurricane. His assignment here lasted less than a year, but he had fond memories of being here and watching all the fishing vessels go by, including many of the old wooden Gloucester schooners, of which at one time there were hundreds, but they're all gone, and a few are now museum vessels at places like South Street Seaport in New York, or the Essex River Marine Museum just west of Gloucester, Massachusetts, where the Evelina Goulart is. This particular tower has a lot of brick in its construction instead of a lot of cast iron, making it much easier to maintain. It has a flashing white light which guides ships and fishing vessels into the harbor. And if you look closely in this particular focus, we have a sailboat approaching. It's in the center of the channel, and as soon as it passes that red buoy, you'll have an idea where the red buoy is. The 3 R's apply in navigation when boats are returning to a harbor. Red, right, return. Okay, that red buoy is on the right side of the channel, which the sailboat just passed, and the green buoy is on the left. You follow the green going out and the red coming in. This lighthouse has undergone a couple of restorations in the past 20 years or so, courtesy of the Bristol County inmates at the Bristol County Jail. So little or no work was done at taxpayer expense. It's basically been all free labor at no expense of the taxpayer whatsoever. And it's been a remarkable job of restoration as well. A couple of people have visited out here in recent years to photograph the interior, as I understand it. And this is one of the most notable landmarks at the edge of New Bedford Harbor. If we look over to the left, you can see the hurricane barrier, excuse me, which prevents New Bedford Harbor from being assaulted by rogue waves or tidal surges during hurricanes. There is a gate that all boats have to pass through to get into the harbor, and that gate is tested on a monthly basis. And the hurricane barrier extends for quite a distance from Fairhaven across the harbor, down along Rodney French Boulevard into the downtown area. And it's been quite effective at protecting the harbor on many occasions. Just inside the barrier, there is another lighthouse, the Palmer Island Lighthouse, which is prominently featured on the seal of the city of New Bedford. And Palmer Island during the hurricane of '38 was manned by Arthur Small and his wife, who lived in a little house right on the island, which was accessible at dead low tide. You just walk along the inside of the hurricane barrier, wait till the tide drops, you can walk out, and you've got about 20-25 minutes before you have to make your way back, or wait several hours if the tide comes in too quickly. Mrs. Small was killed during the hurricane of '38 when she went outside to assist Arthur in securing various items around the light station. And the tidal surge got her, and she was swept into the harbor. And at that time, according to legend or history, she had the payroll, which she and her husband had just received from the U.S. Lighthouse Service. When her body was found on the Fairhaven side just a few days after the hurricane passed, the payroll was missing. And according to what Arthur said, she had it securely tied to her waist. But in any event, there is a painting that's been given to the city of New Bedford in memory of Arthur Small for his efforts. He later went up to Boston Harbor and staffed a lighthouse up there for a short time before retiring. But this is a wonderful view of the city of New Bedford, with a couple of old mill buildings showing above the treetops. There's even a house over there that Alan is focusing on that has a replica of a light on top of its roof. It shows how much they love the lighthouses around here. And of course, at our backside, there's a sweeping vista of Buzzards Bay. Again, I urge you folks to come down here. Visit the city, see what it has to offer. This is a place where Herman Melville walked the streets, where many whalers went to sea. Many whalers lost their lives coming out of here on voyages that lasted 5 years or more. This is where Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave turned abolitionist, gave many, many presentations to many different groups. This was a mill city. It was a whaling city. At one time there were 10 candle making factories here. Sometime around the 1830s there were more than 120 whaling vessels that called this port home. And they traveled the waters around the world looking for their prey, the sperm whale. This is a wonderful place to visit. Come and enjoy. Join us on more adventures soon.